I'll say good afternoon and good evening from wherever you are. We're really happy to have you here today. My name is Joy Kiminja. I'm going to be your moderator for the day. And of course, I'll be just expecting your participation, your anticipation, and really high energy for this packed session full of wisdom and knowledge. And so as we begin, this is our Marahaba session. As you might know or not know, let me just disclose that I'm currently sitting in Nairobi, Kenya, which is in East Africa, and the Marahaba is a Swahili word, which is a response to a formal greeting. And it really just welcomes us all, and it's an acceptance of a greeting, especially from a younger person to an older person. And so this is our session to just say welcome. We receive you and we accept you. Yes, and now I'll just ask if you're here, we'd like to know you, to know where you're joining from, what you do, and of course your expectation for this session. So I'll ask you to utilize the chat box, send your brief introduction right there, and I'm sure everybody else will interact with you adequately. And of course, at the end of it, we'll even have a session for you to ask questions. And without much further ado, I will invite Dr. Sokfa John to just take us through the introductory part, even as people continue to introduce themselves in the chats. Kindly just kick us off with an introduction to DP Africa, just a brief session right there. Karibu, Dr. Sokfa.
Thank you very much, Joy, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I see more people are still joining, so yeah, there was a very high number of registrants, so I hope everyone is able to connect. So DP Africa, Digital Peacebuilding Africa, which we simply call a community of practice. It's a community and a group of people that are dedicated.
Don't start.
The microphone. Please remember to mute your microphone, okay? Please. Thank you. So, as I was saying, it's a community of people that are dedicated to exploring the use of digital technologies for sustainable and resilient peace building in Africa. We started in December 2024, last year, beginning with an introductory training on digital peace building on the continent, but also exposing participants to several digital peace building practices and projects around the world. And the first cohort was about 34 people, and they constituted the community of practice. And we hope to be expanding this community. And the reason why this project was established was to respond to some of the needs that were articulated by many individuals and leaders of organizations in different parts of Africa. And part of this articulation came through my research in Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and other parts of Africa remotely, which was funded by the Social Science Research Council through the African Peacebuilding Network. And the research was trying to explore the connection between digital peacebuilding and local peacebuilding in different African contexts. And two very critical projects that I spent a lot of time with were the Women and Youth for Justice and Peace Initiative in Nigeria and the Maskani Commons project in Kenya, which also was supported and established with collaboration with Build Up and Rongo University, and Caleb, who is our main speaker today, was also part of that. So we established this also partly as a Rotary Peace Fellowship social change initiative. But moving beyond all of these things, it has become just a community of people who are passionate about peace building and are curious and interested in using technologies for peace building in whatever way they can. So the core focus for us is building a community, a network of peace builders, creating platforms for exchange of knowledge and sharing of experiences, but also seeking opportunities to collaborate on projects and learning together and to foster mutual growth amongst ourselves. We also want to promote the practices that integrate local and cultural knowledge, practices, and experiences into digital tools and strategies on the continent for the purpose of peace building. We are starting with monthly webinars. So every month on the first Thursday of the month, we will hold a webinar where we will invite people from different parts of the world, practitioners, those engaging digital technologies from a policy perspectives, as well as researchers to come and share knowledge with us and share their experiences with us. And we will also be developing future cohorts. So we will have about 2 trainings every year, introductory trainings on digital peace building. So we hope that you will keep connecting with us and that you will become part of our community. Yeah, so thank you. And I wish you a very wonderful session today. I know it's going to be a great session. So please enjoy and interact and keep connected with us. Thank you. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Dr. Sokpa. And yes, as promised, there will be a lot of learning. And in a bid to continue that, I'd just like to teach you some more Swahili. So we've had what the DP Africa Community of Practice is all about. And really what we aim to achieve is to really have peace in practice. And to do that, we have our Hekima session, which is now where a wealth of wisdom and knowledge is shared and exchanged in this space with community of peace builders. And we'll have Victor Baba, one of our own. He was part of the first cohort that just concluded their session last year. And so I'll invite him for just 5 minutes to give you some Hekima nuggets on what he does in matters peace in practice.
I'm not sure
Welcome, Victor.
Victor has managed to join. Okay, I don't think he has managed to join.
Oh, he's yet to join in?
Yeah, I think he's not been able to join, but we can move on to the other session and maybe later when he joins. Hi, Joy. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I was speaking while I'm muted.
Oh, okay.
So let me just do that again. So allow me to introduce Mr. Caleb Gichuchi. I'm our mind maestro for the day and the keynote speaker. He'll be addressing us on the digital peace building in Africa and the tools he uses. So Mr. Caleb Gichuchi is the Africa lead at Build Up, and he has an extensive experience and skill in digital transformation and engagement. So he uses some very interesting advanced technological strategies to address election violence, extremism, conflict mitigation, and inclusive development. And at Build Up, He manages the digital conflict program, information ecosystems and depolarization projects in Africa. Just give us, wherever you are, just give him a round of applause as he takes the floor to take us through the next session. Welcome, Mr. Caleb Gichuchi.
Great, thank you so much, Joy. Let me just share my slides. Just give me 1 second. 1 second. All right, here we go. All right, can you see my screen?
We can see
It's
you,
saying,
but not your
well,
slide yet.
okay, it's I need the sharing request. It's basically just told me to send a request.
Oh, okay, great. I've just
Yeah.
done.
All right, 1 second. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes, yes.
All right.
Yes, yes, we can.
Great.
Proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joy. Thank you very much, Dr. Sokfa, and everybody else who is in the room. And I'm glad, first of all, just to be here and share ideas with all of you and also learn from your experiences. So I'll try and fly through my slides in 20 minutes so that we can open room for discussion and learn from one another, because I think that is where usually there's some rich engagement. So like Joy has said, I'm Caleb. I'm currently now in Nairobi, and I'll be walking you through some of the examples and some of the things that we've been seeing in the space of digital peace building. So yeah, let's dive in. All right, so before I just get into that particular aspect of the presentation, I just want to frame this presentation by saying that peace building is a process, and participation and inclusion is key. And without that, we usually have systems, processes that either fail or they drag on for too long. And the technology aspect of the digital peace building is mainly to facilitate this participation, to enhance this inclusion. So it's not the end goal. And it's something that a lot of us, we've seen in this space, that people run into technology to have it as their main goal and just have it front and center. So I just want to frame that as we start. Are you seeing my slides change? I'm sorry, I have multiple screens. I wasn't quite sure if that's switching.
Yes, so we are seeing
Okay.
slides on peace building as a process.
Okay, great. Okay. So when we think about then technology, like I've said, as a facilitator or as an element that enhances peace building, then again, to frame it, that we don't just think of it as a tool, right? So there is that people approach you and say something like technology is inherently positive, and if you use it, then you're definitely going to realize this potential for change, or actually realize the change in itself. But what we're increasingly seeing that, inherently technology is not positive or negative, right? And even we push it forward to say that it's not necessarily neutral, because somebody will say it all depends on how you use it, right? But we challenge that by saying that technology creates environments that can either facilitate conflict or cohesion. And when we say facilitate conflict cohesion, it's just of what it affords the user to do. And also when we also say that it affords you to, for instance, bring people together and have dialogue, then it's creating an environment where cohesion can actually unfold. So just to frame those two, because I think this whole space of digital peace building has been misunderstood for the longest part, where people think of, here's a technology, go and use it, and it's actually going to create positive outcomes. But what we're seeing is, even just by using it, you might be putting other people at risk, right? So you might be creating other conditions that are either exposing users of the technology or even the community that you're actually trying to help in the first place. So by approaching this space like that, we've created a framework to and help us analyze, basically think of this space a bit more in a structured way. And we think of the affordances of technology that allow for social cohesion and peace building. And those are mainly three. And one is data management, where you are able to gather, analyze, and visualize data about peace and conflict. So this was, before technology, this was quite challenging. So what this does is, you're able to gather it faster, analyze it, more efficiently, address multiple errors. So this is technology has allowed us to do this through this affordance. And then the other one is strategic communication, where we're able to engage more people, more different people, in multiple conversations, mainly about peace and cohesion. And then the last one is reimagining what a dialogue might look like, where before it was a closed room of mediators, but now it can actually show up in a digital space where we can actually have conversation. I think Richard is unmuted, so there might be some background noise. Sorry for that.
Please mute yourself.
Yeah.
Erica.
So these affordances allow us to structure the work that we're doing and think of which category, which affordance is this project trying to use for technology. So even with the advent of AI, which, as we are currently seeing globally, a lot of people are talking about artificial intelligence. I just want to know that in the work that we are currently doing, is we see it still fall within these three. There's a new wave of AI that is coming into the space where artificial intelligence is being used as agents to between conflicting groups. And we still look at that as the room, it falls within the affordance of dialogue and networking, where it's no longer just spaces, but also create new actors that were not seen before. So that's something that we can discuss later, but I just want to throw that in because somebody will ask, where does AI fall? Yeah, so I'll walk you through all three of them, and then we can open up for discussion. So when I think of data management, or rather the affordance that technology gives us for this, there is a program that we were running in the lead up to the elections in Kenya in 2022. And what we did is we were looking at the different types of harmful content. I think somebody's still muted. I can hear some background noise. So we led a study. It was basically, we were analyzing social media platforms to see how hate speech on gender, ethnic affiliation, and political affiliation, and also religious affiliation looked like. And majority of the content specifically on hate speech on the political affiliation started very gradually. Like in 2019, it was like 10%, and then it would gradually grow into the election year. So by the election year, we were at like 96% of the content that we had comparatively seen in the years before was quite high in the election year. So we saw that, no surprises there. But what we did find was this wave of gender-based hate that was just constant, whether there was an election or not. And when people kept on saying that there's a hate speech is increasing over election against women, we actually realized that it was on women political actors and not necessarily women across the country. So again, somebody can say, well, no surprises there. However, one of the things, as you remember, in 2020, when COVID hit and people are put onto lockdown, we saw a lot of gender-based violent cases, right? And people were surprised, and they were saying, why is this happening? But we were not surprised because if you looked at the data in 2019, and that's the graph right there you see in pink, not pink, that's purple. You see in 2020, there's a dip, and that's when people go into lockdown, access to internet becomes more challenging. But then it goes back up, right? So it was almost as if the data was telling us in 2019 that if you put people in the same room who are being targeted and they're perpetrators, then it's going to be it's going to be catastrophic. And that is what happened in 2020 after lockdown. So the data was telling us something, but we were not looking because people are fascinated with the election content, hate against ethnicity and religion, just the things that donors sometimes tend to fund in an election year. However, this was lacking there. And when COVID hit, we actually saw the harm that was actually being perpetrated online now manifest offline. So again, this is an example of just being able to use data to try and understand conflict in our community and where it's coming from, right? When people say, oh, people just decided to turn on the women on that particular period during COVID, we're like, no, this is something that has constantly been happening. And now we see the wave of hate has continued to go back up because, again, it's not being addressed as much as people would like. But then beyond that, we're also able to see actors in the top right. You'll see a network graph there, and the blue and the oranges were actors from the political parties that were, the major political parties at the time. And these are the actors of the most prolific in spreading hateful content across the country on X. And what we found the strategy was they would go onto news outlets and they'd go into like their websites or accounts, and they would take the information from the news agencies and then convert it back to favor their own audiences. As you can see, every colored node has something like an umbrella behind it, and those are their followers. Like, these are their loyal soldiers. The colored nodes are the top 10 prolific actors who are spreading hateful content online. So we were able to understand their tactics by just looking deeper into how they were moving content. And the nodes in the center of that network are actually news outlets. So they would go in, take an article, reframe it with misinformation and a lot of hate, and then push it back to their networks. And then that would then, spread out through the conversations online. And here we quickly understood that people were not consuming content directly from the news source, but they were rather consuming information from their conduits. The conduits being these people that they trust, these influencers, these bloggers, vloggers who are quite vocal on social media. Some of them call themselves activists. So people are actually consuming information from them. So no matter how hard these news outlets were trying to debunk information, it would not get to basically the third order of magnitude to the public because it had to go through this conduit. So understanding that, then we were able to then create new conduits in the network who are then able now to push out information and say, well, we are no longer going to expect people to go into the source, but we are going to actually put the information in the second order from the source because we know that's where they're going to engage with it. And then we all have heard of early warning, early response. I usually say it's a broken record in Africa where people keep on talking about, I'm doing early warning and early response. But that work primarily relies on a lot of data, right? And this is an example in South Africa where we were able to predict xenophobic violence by 86% accuracy. And what happened was, this was in 2019 in the lead up to the election, we were looking at hateful content on social media in South Africa, and makwerekwere is a term that was being used to target immigrants from, I think, Zimbabwe and neighboring countries in South Africa. And here, the interesting thing was how people understand mis and disinformation. So, and not mis and disinformation, but how they understand early warning and early response. And on the 14th of March, the president spoke in a rally and he talked about the immigrants in South Africa, in Durban. And we predicted that this was going to trigger xenophobic attacks, although he didn't even mention the name of the people, like the ethnic group or the nationality of the people who he was talking about. He just says something like, everybody just arrives in our townships and rural areas and set up businesses without licenses and permits. And based on data we had collected previously for the last, I think it was the previous 2 years, we were able to see that this is framing to target a particular group. And this has a high potential likelihood of violence, and also some of the other activities that had preceded this statement. So, so we warned the authorities, but then they thought the violence would show up 2 or 3 days later. So there's an assumption that when somebody says early warning, early response, there's an assumption that the early response means it's going to happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But then they forget that, for instance, in conflict, people need to organize, people need to plan, people need to even say target where they're going to attack, especially in a non-conflict country. When I say non-conflict, I just mean in the sense of like, this is not a war-torn country. So there's still rule of law, but so then to try to bypass that, to actually participate in this violence, they are following steps that usually follow, right? So 10 days later, or rather 8 days after we had warned them, violence broke out in Durban, and the wave you see in blue, that is actually now the term makwerekwere that was being spread on social media. And the numbers on the right are in the thousands. So that's like 50,000 all the way up to 100,000. So these again helped us understand as peace builders that sometimes hate speech does not precede violence in that sense that we think of it, right? So we would have anticipated the violence to be on the 29th or on the 2nd of April, if you look at that wave, right? However, we realize, this is, again, offline violence triggers online conversations and online hate. So again, thinking of how data is able to give us information of what's happening around us, majority of this work moves into advocacy. So the data in itself is not it's like I said, technology is facilitating the process. So the data management aspect is not the peace building in and of itself. It's only helping you understand the process of conflict so that when you want to push for early response or advocate for more resources to be put because somebody has just said something that is going to trigger violence, there's evidence behind that, right? So this is also another example. I won't dive into this just because of time, but this is an example in Nigeria where we are currently actually looking at religious-based hate across different states to see which states are more resilient and what do they usually talk about when it comes to religious hate, and which ones are less resilient and what do they usually talk about, and be able to compare those two and see what's the difference and how does information flow within those communities. So again, here you're basically trying to understand that space so that when you respond, you're basically responding based on evidence and not just shooting in the dark. So some of the tools that we've used in the past, and I hand selected free tools so that anybody in the session can go out and explore. So these are 6 tools that you can explore. All of them are free. One of them we've built from the ground up is the one on the top right called Phoenix. I just took a screenshot of our manual, but I think some of you have gone through the process. I understand from Dr. Sokfa, some of you actually might be using it. But this is open source. It's open to and free to peace builders who are trying to collect data on social media. So if you're looking to scrape data, analyze data, and create dashboards like the one I've just shown you, then that's your tool. And then the rest, I would dive into them, but I'll just leave that there so that if you want to note them down, you can. But they allow you to collect data, analyze data, and inform your approach to peace building work and responses. Now, the other bit is strategic communications. Now, data, great, helps us to frame evidence and understand that space so that when you're responding online, because we've seen it's basically like a battlefield, right? So we need to be able to understand how do we respond to these spaces. So one of the ways that people do that is strategic communications. And this, I'll tell you, for the last 7 years that I've been looking into this space, this is the most commonly used approach actually in the world with peace builders, and specifically in Africa, where you're trying to engage different people in conversations about stories of a particular ideology. Let's say it's peace building, or it's just cohesion generally, or depolarization. And imagine an organization somewhere in Burkina Faso saying that they want to run a campaign and show people how hate speech is divisive. That's basically what you're talking about when you think about strategic communications. So idea is like the one you're seeing there, and this one actually was one done by UNESCO, which we were part of in a program in Kenya called Social Media for Peace. And the idea here is you put out content online and then you push it out through your networks and you hope that people are going to engage with it. And partly as they're engaging with it, you're also trying to share your tips and lessons and ideas of what a peaceful society looks like. So it is quite challenging to do it, yet so many people tend to do it because it is considered low-hanging fruit in terms of we can set it up now and run with it because all you just need is a social media platform and some messaging, and then you put it out. But when I say it's challenging, it's because it usually doesn't go far. There's an argument that it goes to this idea of speaking to the choir. It only goes to your immediate network because not everybody knows who you are, and people who follow you either align with you or they tend to, even though not align with you, they might agree on most of the things that you share. Sometimes it's considered top down because you're the one who's creating it and then pushing it out, and it's not bottom up. And then you basically have to keep on, reimagining that idea or that point that you're trying to put across so that you keep it fresh. Now, while this is very common, what is not common is another alternative for strategic communication, which we've seen with political actors do a lot in Africa, and that's using advertising. And on the left-hand side is a graph, and this was in the lead up to the Kenyan election in 2022, but it's actually still happening now. And what we saw here was in the social media platforms, political actors were the ones who were spending the most in the top 10 spenders of advertisement. It was political actors. And what they were doing is they would pay Facebook. Facebook gives them space to advertise their content and they push it out. But what that does, it creates this environment where communities are polarized because you can imagine political actors pushing content out. The content is usually about party X is not suitable, party Y is not suitable, my party is suitable. So if the conversation towards an election is always about party A and party B, then you end up polarizing the community because that's all they're talking about. And what you don't see are the peace builders, the actors who we call bridges, who sometimes are like academic institutions, religious organizations, where conversations can happen. These are conversations that are sticky, and they allow for those conversations to happen without being targeted. So imagine like having a debate in a university, right, about political actors. So that usually is allowed to happen without you feeling like I leave there feeling like I'm being targeted. So we didn't see peace builders in this space. So we started seeing a lot of polarity, and we actually even seeing it now again. And what the middle actor does, let's assume like a peace building organization comes in and steps up and say, I'm going to push my content out through using the advertising mechanism. What they're trying to do is change the conversation from party A versus party B into is the electoral process fair? Is it inclusive? Have you collected your voters' card? So still talking about the issue of concern here, which is the election, but not necessarily framing it as A versus B, but also introducing a third way of conversing that is different from these two who are constantly polarizing one another and saying you either for us or against us, or this guy did this, so he needs to go to jail. It's just a lot of polarization. So by understanding how they're using this strategic communications, they're able to get to the electorate that would not otherwise know them. Because as you know, anyone who's done targeting using advertisement on social media, you know you can actually target somebody to the type of food they like, right? It's quite comprehensive. So they're paying for this information, and it goes out and it gets people to where they are, and people start talking, right? But then peace builders are not doing that. So this is just it's usually like a challenge to peace building organizations why they're not doing it. Some people actually don't want to do it because they say it's manipulating the public, which I have my own thoughts about that. But then another way of thinking about strategic communications. Oh, so this was just like a campaign. The one on yellow is just basically like one of the campaigns that was being used to target people online with this message that hate does not belong online. So this is just an example of like a campaign that is organic versus the left one, which has a graph which shows where you can actually pay, which is not organic, where you're actually paying for your content to be pushed out. One other example of strategic communication is where you actually have communities tell their own stories, where they're communicating a different narrative about their communities. So if you think of right now, this is an example of South Sudan actually, and where we gave cameras to communities that were in conflict, and what they were trying to do is to change the narrative that we are not savages, we don't always fight all the time. We are actually a community of people who love the same things that our adversaries or our neighbors who we've been fighting for the longest time love. So this idea of communicating a different framing of the communities, not from an outsider, but from an insider, because the insider will know all the things to bring out in the community that show cohesion. So like this was a picture, this was a video, this is a short documentary about this trading area that brought people together of different communities, just to show that we are cohesive, we do value engagement with other communities, we're not violent. And then the point I wanted to raise with this slide is to say strategic communications can be sometimes tricky because they can turn into activism very quickly, right? So I'm sure you've seen one of these campaigns. If you were not a social media user, then Kony 2012 perhaps was something you saw in Uganda. But then the rest are things that have been happening on social media, and where as you're pushing your content out, you're getting people to engage with your content, it can easily turn into activism because people can easily hijack your process. So we saw a lot of these campaigns turn into like an activism movement where they have one key point and one key agenda, unlike peace building, which doesn't necessarily it does not follow the same patterns as activism, where it's not as rigid as like activism, like roads must fall, else we are going to ban studies, we're going to strike. Like there's that idea of either or. And the challenge here, then you start getting into infiltration, where people come and infiltrate your campaigns. There's misdirection where information is put into these campaigns to misdirect people, and this can actually sometimes even lead to internet shutdowns because, again, they're seen as if they can become too big and out of control, governments tend to again get scared of them. And then the third one, the strategic tools, the tools that are used for strategic communications are, there's one, for instance, this is one called Talk to the City, where you actually get people to share their views. And we've used it in Kenya to talk about police brutality and how this is triggering violent extremism. And people are able to share that, they raise their voices, and this is down to WhatsApp, where people can send voice messages, and then this information is compiled. And then once it's compiled, then it's shared to the public to ask, do you agree with this? Are you seeing the same things? Because this has been collected from a community that has been targeted by violent extremism, and basically asking people to share their views and come together as an offering of solutions as a collective, rather than saying that's the work of the government to solve it. And then we have the ads manager, and all platforms today have an ad manager because you can target anybody anywhere that you want as long as you have money. And then the last one is influencer marketing. We've seen this. This is, influencer marketing is something that we borrow from the marketing world and the commercial world, where you have peace building influencers who tend to, sometimes we give them information, we tell them, oh, because you have this many followers, go out and share this message of peace to your followers, hoping that you will be able to convert them the same way you convert people to buy a product. So here, this is just to say that this particular affordance is heavily commercialized, in the sense of it's a lot of give and take. Like I give you money, you get my content out, right? You give this influencer your content, and they charge you for it. And they tell you the metrics are usually things like, oh, we want to get this number of people engaging, right? It moves away from engaging in a rich way, if I might say, because engagement can mean clicks, can mean just comments, can mean shares. So a lot of this space when it comes to digital peace building, and I think sometimes when people talk about digital peace building, they tend to overemphasize on this, is just to show you that this is what is readily available, right? And a lot of the systems that we use are designed to favor this, because social media platforms are designed to make money and to push your content out by as you pay them. So those are some of the examples of the tools that you can think of when you think about strategic communications. Now the last one is on dialogue and networking, and this one is the least common across all peace building organizations that we've engaged with in Africa, and even just across the world. And you'll see why they tend to be challenging and why they are rare. So dialogue and networking, this is basically creating new spaces for people to talk, connect, and organize. And here we don't mean social media, because social media, you can think of it that way, but because of all the risks that come with just trying to engage on social media, there's a lot of bullying, harassment, doxing. People will just attack you for whatever reason. It's very difficult to set ground rules. So this idea of dialogue and networking doesn't lend itself very well to social media, and that makes it quite challenging and people then end up pulling away from it. However, in the work that we've done, we've seen that there are possibilities to actually be able to run these processes on digital platforms and actually be successful. So there's one program we ran in Burkina Faso where we were actually consulting. We consulted over 2,000 Burkinabe youth on issues of the triggers of conflict. and why some communities were resilient. And here, what we were trying to do is to move them into this safe space where we'd create this space, get them in, and then be able to moderate that space and have a conversation with them and raise issues that then could be implemented offline. So again, remember the first slide I talked about. It was not the end result. It was to facilitate this process of how do we get a collective to come together in a space that they've been using and be able to engage on that process without feeling like I'm on social media, like I'm on Facebook, and all these people are watching me, and somebody's going to attack me. So we basically had a consultation forum on WhatsApp, and I won't get into the steps of it, but just to let you know that this we were able to run this and now translate these particular results from the consultation into offline activities. And then the other one is on UNMISS. So in 2018, there was an agreement, power sharing agreement in South Sudan, and UNMISS came in to try and mediate that process so that the power sharing agreement would be implemented with the least hiccups possible. But then COVID hit from 2018 to 2020. There was a lot of this progress was quite slow, but then COVID hit in 2020, and everybody went onto lockdown, and the government started to get, like, all the people who are involved in this process were now receiving all this mis and disinformation about the other side and what the other side was doing. So this was actually done through Microsoft Teams, where UNMISS said, we want to bring them together through Microsoft Teams, and we're going to have this dialogue process online. And what this allowed them to do is to say, we're going to keep the process ongoing. We're going to get experts into the room, and we're going to have that conversation. And it was actually the first time that these leaders were able to come together, as I think all of them together, and have a conversation. But unlike before, where it was through emissaries, where you'd send one person to the other side and they talk and then they come back. But because there was a gap in that process that that was quite slow, they then moved into these digital spaces that were being moderated by UNMISS to facilitate this communication between the two sides who are supposed to be sharing power. And what this did was to also start to build trust across these two communities that, okay, you're also showing up, I'm going to show up. And then the power that UNMISS had in this digital space is to be able to moderate that space, unlike the offline space where your power is quite limited, because these actors control that space more than they would be able to control a space that you've curated and you're bringing them in to have a conversation. One other tool that we've used is a tool called Polis, and this is basically on deliberation. So if you think of you have an issue, like recently in Kenya we had a Gen Z protests, and these protests were seen as pushback to government to say, look, you can no longer tax us at the rate at which you're trying to do, and then this one met with violence, right? But then, if you imagine if the voices of the collective youth groups across the country were able to be, shared, where youth were able to deliberate among themselves and say, this is what we need, this is what we want, how then that can easily be pushed into decision-making spaces, as opposed to, putting people at harm's way in a protest that then is met with violence. So this one allows people to then have that dialogue again, and you're able to see the results of what people agree on as a collective and what they disagree on. So what you see on the right are areas like in green, we agree, red, you disagree. So this is just a sample data set, don't worry about that. But when you're able to see out of 2,000 or 3,000 youth, these are the things that youth agree on, then you're able to lift those into the next step of your peace building process. Again, remember that the technology is not the end. It's basically a part of the process. So here, we were able to run this process of using deliberative platforms in Sudan, where there was a civilian group that was trying to organize called Tagadom. And they said, we're going to organize so that when the peace processes start between the two military groups, we have a civilian voice. But they were struggling on how to get civilian voices into the room, right? So one of the things we ran was this instance of Polis. And what Polis did is we asked people across Sudan and even in the diaspora, the things that they wanted to see on the different themes that were being organized by this civilian group. And they deliberated. So here you basically say, I want to see an election in the next 2 years. And then people actually agree or disagree or refine your point and say, we don't just want to see an election, we want to have a two-part election. One is presidential and the other one maybe is, I don't know, at the regional level, at the subnational level. So these ideas were then taken back to this civilian group that was running a process to with the two military leaders. But then when they came back in, they said, now we have a citizen voice in this process. Otherwise, they were not credible from the beginning. They were being seen as, you're just a group of expatriates or you're just a group of academics who have come together, but where's the citizen voice? So this was able to get them in. And what they were able to do is for every theme and topic, they would get up to 10,000 people vote and engage with this content and deliberate and bring this into that process of mediation. And then the last one is this project that Dr. Solfa talked about. And this is the Maskani, we call it the Maskani Commons because it started from a project called the Commons that we ran in the US. And we said, here we were comparing the US and Kenya, and we want to see how would it work if what we've done in the US were tried in Kenya, because the argument there was people in different contexts engage differently, so you cannot expect the same to happen in Kenya. And what the Maskani program was doing, it had 5 pillars, and it had a setup of engagement online at different stages, and from the easiest to the most difficult. And we worked with 6 universities in Kenya. And the things it was looking at were, one, promoting positive messaging. This is, like I said, this is the most common thing that we've seen on digital in peace building organizations and actors. And I won't repeat that. And then the second one was humanizing peace, where people would actually go online and tell their own stories of conflict or peace building, where they were either they were in a place where they would have considered it as being conflicting with their ideals or the ideals of the community, and then sharing those stories online and then inviting people to, engage with that content. And then the other option was creating change from within, where people are going to their immediate communities on social media, like your friends. And anytime you'd see your friend put out something harmful, you try and engage with that person and tell them, hey, look, this is not necessarily great because it's dividing our community. So basically creating change because you and that friend already have trust with one another, and you have more trust than somebody coming out from the outside with positive messaging trying to engage with them. And then the third one was, or the fourth one was listening and de-escalating. So basically going into conversations that were highly polarized, creating space where you could listen to people who are very, very hateful, and de-escalating that conversation on the chats, on the comment section, and to a point where people were actually able to have a conversation without necessarily agreeing, but not insulting one another. And then the last one was facilitating depolarizing dialogue, where you'd know a topic would be so divisive, but then you'd raise it and then invite people to come and have a conversation on the comment section, and then you'd hold the conversation. Or you'd identify a topic that is divisive already, go into the comment section and facilitate a dialogue to a point where people actually felt like, they were being heard and they were no longer just being targeted because of their identities. So I won't get into here just examples of how that unfolded. And so I won't get into that because of time. But on the last slide, I just want to think about a couple of things. One is, if you look at the first one, the fast affordance of data management, you realize that there's a lot of technology use, right? The scraping of the data, tabulating of the data, classifying of the data, and there's limited human engagement. All the examples I showed you were just, I collect the data, I analyze it, I get the trends, and that's it, and then I share it, right? So there's less to do with the human intervention. But then it starts to change when you go to the strategic communications. Here, you see a bit of both. It's like almost 50-50, where it's like the tool you're using is allowing you to send your message out. Let's say it can be a hashtag because you're using the algorithm of the system that knows that if this hashtag gets many likes, then it's going to get more views, or it's going to be put up at the top of the list of the what's trending. So you're relying on that, but also you're relying on developing the content yourself. So there's a human role there. So you're developing the content, make sure the content is sensitive to a particular group and is going to trigger their reaction. And then as you go down to dialogue and networking, you realize that the technology role there is quite limited. The technology there is basically giving you just a platform. And your work is now to actually push and pull people to contribute content into that space. And people coming in to hold conversations and just hold spaces for people to engage, as opposed to saying, this technology is going to do that on my behalf. Now, we are seeing a move towards people trying to test whether AI would be able to do it. And that's basically our next area, to think of what role would AI play. We see play a role in all three, but the most challenging one, I guess, speaking just from experience, I think would be the third one. All right, I'll stop there. I've rushed through this. There's quite a lot. I had to cut some slides out, but yeah, I'm gonna stop there and take questions or open it up for discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Caleb. I mean, I was just here and I'm engaging at the same time you're speaking. I'm just telling Dr. Sokpa, wow, what an informative session, a practical session. And I'm sure even the participants, the audience here are just really keen on even actualizing what you've just spoken about. You know, I noticed something in your slides, humanizing peace, you know, and how you broke down the three aspects of data management, strategic communications, and dialogue and networking to a move that, you know, puts people at the center, even as you utilize the technology to build peace and to enhance and depolarize. I mean, you're talking about some pretty amazing practical things that we can actually implement. And the fact that it's live, it just really speaks to what we are looking for as a community of practice. And so at this juncture, I'll just invite questions from the audience. If you have a question, you can raise your hand up. But first, I wish to acknowledge those who've been commenting in the comments section. We have some questions there also that I hope you'll be able to address. Yes.
Can I start with these ones, and then
yes, please
if there are any other, they can just raise them.
Please do proceed.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Maggie, is that Maggie or Maggie? I'm not sure. Maggie Mungai is asking, how is this done? I'm not sure what exactly you are asking, and then you follow up with, do you filter specific words to make up this data and across which platforms? Can you just provide a bit more detail on this question if Maggie is there? Like, what exactly were you asking for this one? Is it the networks or I'm suspecting this must be the first graph. Is that correct?
Miss Maggie Mungai, if you're present, kindly unmute and just address us.
All right, maybe as we are waiting for Maggie, I think I can move to the next one, which is Joseph. Joseph is asking, conflict where trigger is abuse of digital tool. Can one deploy traditional peace resolution methods? Yes, I think the thing about digital peace building is that it doesn't stand alone. Like, digital peace building is not one thing that says we're just going to engage online and that's it. And a lot of scholars are now realizing that it's a continuum where you start offline, you go online, you go back offline, you keep on looping until you've addressed the problem. So what I mean by that is, if we are looking at, let's say, conflict around an electoral period, or let's say just something about, again, a conflict between communities, let's say in some part in Mali, and you're thinking of this conflict is has elements of it showing up on digital spaces, right? You can look into that digital spaces to get some insights on how to respond offline. So that's one example. But the other way to do it is when you're using traditional peace resolution methods, you're basically saying, okay, we are going to not necessarily look at the technologies, but we're going to look at the people. And that's great. However, in a society where technology has become more like when you find mobile phones more proliferated, you'll find that yes, people will show up in those conflict resolution forums and events, but then the moment they leave or they go back home, they express their true issues on social media, right? Or they'll express their own issues on digital platforms. So when you see that, then you start to realize that there needs to be a continuation of that resolution method, not just offline, but also online, right? Or they leave the session and then they go off online, maybe to engage with content, and then they see people who are not part of your process, and they see them still using harmful content, still targeting them, right? So it's not congruent with what's happening offline, right? So they'll say, they can even lose hope. They're saying, you keep on telling us to engage through your traditional peace resolution methods. However, online, we are being targeted. You want us to keep quiet? No, we're going to retaliate. So I think there is a delicate balance there, the question of the chicken or the egg, what comes first, but also remembering that both of them are giving you indicators of where to look. So if you're engaging with people off.
Sorry, Mr. Caleb, we lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear
Okay,
me
now
now?
we can. Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I think, yeah, my internet is a bit shaky. Let me see. Yeah, great. And then let me see. Is another question. How impactful is the use of how impactful is use of digital use to counter disinformation from government or political party in power? Well, yeah. So now we're getting into the interesting stuff. The example that I showed in the second slide, I showed a network, and that network was from the incumbent and the opposition. Okay. And there's a lot of disinformation from both sides because these were people who are looking for power, and they've hired the best bloggers to go out and share this information. Now, the first thing, if you are on this path of countering disinformation, don't just focus on the content. A lot of people just begin with the content and end at the content, what is true and what is false. That is not enough. You also want to look at the patterns. Who's moving information where? Who is starting it in the morning and versus who's starting it at night? Who are the key spreaders? Who are the key creators? There's a slide. It's like it was like a fourth slide after the last one, but it showed us one interesting pattern that in the morning, 3 a.m., bloggers would wake up and they'd start a hashtag, and the hashtag, and they were basically like 12 people who had created bot accounts. And what they would do is they would retweet one another very like it was so rapid between 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 a.m., up to 6 a.m. in the morning. And what the network would do is they would take one hashtag, let's say something like Caleb should not be president. Let's say they're targeting me, right? So then that hashtag would be retweeted amongst themselves and their bot accounts so many times that by the time it got to 6 o'clock, that hashtag had generated over 1,500 tweets. Now, if you know how Twitter works, Twitter will give you a ranking based on the number of retweets your hashtag gets. Now, the people who've just woken up are going to work, maybe they're caught in traffic, and the first thing they do is they open up their phones and they look for that hashtag, which is trending, and they'll see, wow, people don't really like Caleb. However, it's not people, it's 20 people who basically created this consensus. It's a thing we actually in digital peacebuilding call it manufactured consent, where you're creating an illusion that majority of my constituents don't like me, but really it's a few people. So then you're in your car and you see this and you decide, you know what, I also don't like him, or he's not as popular as I thought he was. And then just like that, I lose your vote, right? So, but you see, it's no longer about the content, right? Because it's now about the process. that is basically disinformation. They are saying that they've created a situation where the disinformation is no longer about the content, but it's your perception of what is true versus what is false. So if you're thinking about doing this work, specifically going into disinformation work, invest in one, content, of course, because you want to know what triggers people. Because there's a chapter we're actually publishing out that shows content that triggers people to believe versus which one does not. And then, because then that can focus on debunking. But then the other thing you want to know is the process. How do they do it? How organized are they? Because once you know how organized they are, then whatever your counter is no longer just about the content. It's also about how you organize yourself online. Are you also going to be waking up in the morning at 3 a.m. so that when this hashtag is trending, you are also pushing out a comparatively countering campaign that is basically showing that this is coordinated. You're basically calling to the process as opposed to the content. Then so Joy asks, how do we practically draw the line between activism and peace building, especially in the context where there are outright injustices? So what we saw in the comparative was activism had very clear, like unidirectional goals. So it was very clear on one thing. This is one thing we want. We want the fees to fall. Peace building had multiple needs or wants, right? So it's about, can we hear you out? We don't want you to agree. We don't want you to agree with us completely, because then you're moving away from peace building, even into authoritarianism, where you're telling people you agree with us, or as we know, peace building is about bringing different opinions together and finding room for them to explore and share their ideologies without necessarily attacking one another, where you can disagree, but we're not necessarily saying that our disagreements need to turn to violence. So activism flips that script to say, we want this one thing. It's like in Kenya, when people say it, reject the finance bill. Reject the finance bill is activism. But when you're discussing the finance bill, you're more inclusive, because not everybody really wants the bill to be rejected. Some people say there's some things that are going to be beneficial. Let's keep some things. Let's remove the taxation. Let's reduce it. But when you're saying reject, you're basically removing everything. So activism tends to lean to an absolutism, versus peace building tends to be a bit more inclusive of multiple opinions, even though they don't agree. And in activism, if you start to realize that you're being targeted by raising a question about how absolute the demand of the activists are, then you already know you're in activism. Because peace building will allow you to raise your voice and say, well, fees must fall, but how much do we want, right? And we just can't say fees must fall. What do we want? It was like roads must fall, or if roads must fall, what is going to replace it? But sometimes by asking those questions, you're seen as a betrayer of the movement, and then you easily know that you're coming. So I remember even in Kenya today, people say, like, for instance, Ruto must go. Somebody says, then who will replace? And people say, don't ask that now. And Ruto is the current president in Kenya, for anyone who doesn't know. And somebody will ask you, what happens then? And then you'll be seen as somebody who's a sympathizer with the president and not seen as part of the movement. So activism and peace building sometimes can clash based on those needs and desires of one wants to be inclusive and have multiple voices shared in dialogue, versus one wants one thing that is very clear and it's absolute, and it's either you're with us or else. And then addressing digital peace building. Traditional elders, religious leaders, and CSOs leaders, important players for harnessing digital peace building? Yes. So like I said, you remember the first slide I kept on saying, it's the peace building process requires participation and inclusion. Digital peace building the digital tools try to enhance this participation and inclusion. Now, if you think of all these actors, let's say, for instance, when you think of the data aspect. So in 2019, we see there's a lot of data targeting women online. What do? We keep quiet, nothing. COVID comes in, it hits us, and then we see all this violence being meted against women, and becomes a national disaster. Now, if that data is gathered and then given in, of course, not in the graphs, but is given to traditional elders, and they're informed that there is a space where young men are targeting women and it's really, really bad and you need to do something about it, then you have a two-way process where one is looking at the digital and the other one is looking at the traditional leaders and elders and how they're responding to that. Because you also want to see the work that they're doing. Is it impacting what you're seeing online? Is it reducing the volume you are seeing, right? If you show the network of hateful actors online and you tell the CSO leaders or even political and religious leaders that, look, here are your followers and this is what they're doing. In Nigeria, what they did is they signed a social media peace agreement. It was the first of its kind. I think it was the governors of some states, they signed a peace building social media peace agreement, unlike the peace agreement of conflict. And they said, in this agreement, we are not going, every time we're going to see our supporters push content that is hateful out, we are going to condemn it. We are not going to encourage it. We're not going to keep quiet. We are going to actually take a role. So in that sense, their work was not necessarily to go online and share it, but it was actually to go in a rally and say, we are seeing what you're doing online and you need to stop. We are not enemies of each other. We're just competitors. Yes, you can compete, but remember, we are all, yeah. So this idea of the actors who can engage with this content, yes, and some of them are tech savvy because, as you know, most of the peace building organizations don't have a data team. They don't have, most of them will tell you they have a social media manager or a communications officer who puts out their content out when they go for a meeting or they go for a campaign. So this requires a little bit of investment, not just on the technology, but also on the personnel. So once you have that, doesn't mean that everybody else needs to then set up a data center, but then that can now go back into the CSO leaders and to the traditional elders. How effective would the use of AI be in addressing issues of peace building, since its algorithm heavily depends on what it is fed? Do you think there are some sort of bias here and there? Oh wow, this is an exciting question and also a challenging one. I've been doing a lot of research into bias of AI. There is a tool, there is a platform, and I'll encourage you all to go and look at it. It's called, I'm just putting it in the chat. It's called the Habermas machine. It's actually being developed by Google. And it's an artificial intelligence platform that is meant to do mediation and mediate communities in conflict. Okay. Now, the question you're asking is, how effective would it be, considering that the algorithm depends heavily on what it is fed? Now, what it is fed is examples of other mediation processes throughout the years. The ones that have worked, the ones that have not worked. Okay. So when it's in the room, it's trying to identify patterns that are going to give it the best possibility of what is going to work, using examples of thousands of hours of talks by people like Kofi Annan when they were in Nairobi, because all these things were actually being typed in real time. So this is fed into the machine, and then the machine actually is trying to mediate this process. So there's a question here, yes, because not all conflicts around the world were solved by mediation. The conflicts today have taken a different dynamic altogether, where we are seeing there's this whole conversation about fragmentation, how and the states, for instance, like Ukraine's war will affect Kenya indirectly, or will affect Tanzania or South Africa based on who they support in that war, or like what we've seen, like geopolitical alignments in Israel and Palestine. By saying we support Israel, it becomes problematic versus when you say we support Palestine. So this is just to say that you cannot train it on all the possible outcomes that conflicts are going to take in today's world. As we know, conflicts are complex. It's not just about me and you fighting. There are all those other actors who are involved, who want vested interests. So unless it has visibility of all that information, I think it's still going to be a challenge. And the assumption, even with the Habermas machine, is it usually says all factors withstanding, right? That means it has all factors involved in that conflict, which, as we know, is quite challenging. Like we've seen in Sudan right now, that the Middle East is involved, African Union is involved, Kenya is involved. So all these actors who are involved for whatever reasons, and for secret reasons, maybe for the oil or all these other resources, that is not going to show up in that space, right? And by that, you might lose a lot of information that is needed to deliver a good mediation process. So we are testing it. It's if it's conflict between me and Dr. Sokfa, it can help us address that. But when it starts to think about all these other things at the national level, international level, then there's so many other things that need to be considered. What is your advice to peace building organization in the light of emerging technology and digital tools designed to cause conflict? So, Joseph, good question. Like I said earlier, a lot of peace building organizations want to move into this space. I'll say, if you're moving into this space, think of what you want to address and what type of conflict you want to, not what type of conflict, but what your space is, what your niche is, right? So for instance, and what I mean by that is the conflict you're looking at showing up in digital spaces, right? Otherwise, you'll be trying to address conflict between Hausas and who are the, Dr. Sokfa, you'll have to guide me here. I remember the analysis we were looking at, herders and farmers in Nigeria, where it's like one community is just known for herding their cattle, but then the other is their farmers. So when you have conflict at that level, it's not showing up on digital platforms. Yes, people might react to it, but these are people who are not engaging in those platforms. But then you find yourself using all these AI tools to try and raise a campaign and engage with them, and nobody's engaging, or the people who are engaging are not even the ones who are in the conflict. It reminds me of a program in Uganda where the Karamajong cluster conflict, some of their leaders were given VR machine to wear and see how their communities live, so that they can actually see that their communities are humans and they're not animals, because they used to attack in the night and there was a narrative that they are ghosts. So it made them even more afraid, because they were given the VR machines and they wore them and they could not believe how real it was, yet the people were not there. Unlike a TV or a video where they had seen in the communities, a virtual reality device was so confusing to them, it actually made the conflict even worse. So again, the question is, if you are looking into peace building organization, think of some of the conflicts you're seeing showing up in digital spaces. If they are, think of how do you want to invest in that space, right? Because a lot of like I said earlier, we will find somebody, like an organization will have a communications officer whose background is media and communications, but they don't have a background in like understanding how technology works, in the sense of how can people manipulate it. They can, of course, hone their skills to get to it, but then that should be an investment if you're looking into that. The intersection between mediation and artificial intelligence is an interesting one. We had the same discussion yesterday and today during a mediation training. Thank you, Victor, and I'm glad you're here. I think I've answered all of them, Joy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Caleb. And I can see Victor is there, and maybe he might just want to say something in less than a minute before we transition now to the Baraka session. Welcome, Mr.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say well done, Caleb, for all the interesting work that you're doing across the world. And the intersection between technology and mediation is just an amazing one. For the last couple of days, yesterday and today, we've just been having conversations around technology and mediation. Is technology going to replace mediators? Are mediators going to lose their jobs because of technology? That's an interesting conversation that I think we will preserve for another day. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Victor Baba. He's joining us from Kenya, I hope.
Yes, I'm joining you from Strathmore right now.
Oh, that's amazing. We're in the same space, so we can continue the conversation, surprisingly. Okay, so Victor, we'll get back on that. I'm so happy that you're here, and so you can shed light into a few other things that I have in mind. But all is not lost for participants, actually. This is a community of practice, and it's a community at first, because this is the space where we get to engage, share and exchange, best practices in our various fields. And so we will be inviting you to engage with us. And this just takes me now to bless you all. with this next session, which is called the Baraka session, where we just release our blessings to you. At the same time, our blessing comes in the form of, what you have planned next. Maybe you're wondering, okay, you've talked about the DP Africa community of practice. How can I engage? How can I involve more people to spread the word and to really have that positive engagement that Mr. Caleb has so graciously, explained to us? And so the next webinar, as Dr. Sokfa had mentioned, is that it will be happening on the first Thursday of May this year. Let me hear some round of applause wherever you are. Thank you. And of course, since this community of practice is the first cohort, in addition to those who are joining us here for the first time, maybe it's important for you to note that we'll also be having another training, and the dates will be, communicated to you. We are hoping to have cohorts twice a year, so that we can really and indeed grow this peace building to reach all the people of the world. And yes, we have also the key learnings from this session, and all the powerful messages that have been sent via our chat box. We'll be sharing on our socials. So feel free to follow us on our LinkedIn account and stay updated. We have so many things lined up for you, and we hope to see you engaging with us actively and sharing your key learnings and tagging us. On LinkedIn, you can find us at DP Africa. The same will be shared. I don't know if Dr. Sokfa can share that on the chats as I speak. And then if you wish to join our WhatsApp group of the community of practice, the same also, you can leave a message on the chats and we will do the follow-up. Thank you so much. Allow me to just re-invite Dr. Sokfa to give us our vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Joy, and thanks everyone for participating. I really was really excited to sit here and listen to Caleb speak and expose us to the amazing and wonderful work that he has been doing, and several other people with him. Caleb is someone I respect so much. I have used his work, I follow his work, I admire the work he does around the world, as Victor mentioned. I admire his work greatly, and I encourage everyone to keep following his work. Check out Build Up. Some of the things he spoke about, I think Build Up has a free training on an introductory training to digital peace building. You can also check it out. It's available freely online. And yes, so thank you so much, Caleb. I thoroughly enjoyed that session, and I look forward to more conversation with you. And you have been a very supportive person to our community from the start, from when we were grappling with some of these ideas. You've encouraged and advised, and I've enjoyed several conversations with you about this topic and about the possibility of growing a community of practice. So thank you for speaking to us. I will like to also thank my team that has been working so hard behind the scenes. Hasi Bonnet, who designed the flyer, Ilya, who is busy with the notes, Joy Gitau, who helped to conceptualize and plan this session, and also Joy Kiminja for your moderation, but also for your hard work behind the scenes and planning for the sessions and future sessions. Thank you so much for everyone on the DP Africa community of practice. Thank you, Victor, for always being a great friend and supporter. So we look forward to seeing all of you again in the first week of May, and hopefully every month after that. Thank you so much, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much.